police horses and a drenched old lady floundering in the middle of a pond. I swear, this really happened. It all began with something so ordinary it was almost laughable. My horses were simply drinking from the ranch pond when she appeared armed with her HOA handbook like it was a weapon, screeching, "You can't let animals pollute our water supply." She charged at them as though they were criminals and shouted about calling law enforcement. And wouldn't you know it, moments later the police were there. But after hearing both sides, they turned to her and asked if she'd like to wade in and gather proof of the so-called contamination herself. She went completely speechless. I stood there, phone in hand, recording every second. And what she ended up discovering at the bottom of that pond, well, let's just say the twist was bigger than anyone saw coming. It was a regular Tuesday morning at Thunder Ridge Ranch. I was working on the gate by the pasture while my daughter, Emma, giggled as she fed carrots to our horses. Her laughter echoed across the open fields. The pond, which had been part of our land for generations, sat about 50 yards from the house, a natural spring-fed spot older than any deed. Steam, our raging quarter horse, was leading the others to the pond for their usual morning drink. That's when the chaos began. A woman in a blindingly white blazer came stomping across the property, waving a stack of papers like a badge. Her hair was a perfectly styled helmet that didn't budge in the wind, and her heels made it obvious she'd never set foot on real land, let alone a ranch. She had that unmistakable air of someone who believed rules were made for others and she was the one meant to enforce them. "Excuse me," she bellowed with all the smugness of a traffic warden on a power trip. "I'm Victoria Blackthorne, president of the Riverside Heights Homeowners Association, and those animals must be removed from that water immediately." She thrust the paper at me like it held divine authority. Emma paused mid-chew, looking up with wide 8-year-old eyes that always managed to cut through adult nonsense. I walked over at an unhurried pace, because the more you rush, the more people like Victoria assume they're in control. The horses barely flinched, continuing to drink peacefully as though her arrival were nothing more than a breeze. That seemed to aggravate her even more. "This is private property," I said calmly, keeping my voice measured. "That pond's been here long before your subdivision ever broke ground. My family's owned this land for 3 generations. Victoria's face turned the shade of a ripe tomato, but she stood firm with the tenacity of someone used to winning arguments through sheer force of voice. She opened a folder, revealing a map covered in neon highlighters and sticky notes. "According to our environmental oversight guidelines," she declared like a town crier, "any water source within a quarter-mile radius of our neighborhood falls under HOA regulation. Health and safety protocols must be observed. Your animals are polluting a shared water system, and I have the right to file a violation." The audacity was so over the top I almost laughed. If it wasn't so maddening, it might have been impressive. I looked over at Emma, who had walked over to Steam, protectively resting her hand on his neck. After everything she'd already gone through, especially after her mum's accident at this ranch, these animals, they were her sanctuary. The last thing she needed was some self-important official trying to dismantle it all. "Let me see that paperwork," I said, holding out my hand. But Victoria clutched it closer, as if letting me read it would weaken her position. "I don't think you realize how serious this is," she said, her pitch rising with every syllable. "I've already submitted a preliminary report to the city's environmental division. You have 24 hours to comply or I'll take this to higher authorities." The horses, meanwhile, had finished their drink and were rambling peacefully back toward the barn, completely unaware of the bureaucratic battle taking place on their behalf. What Victoria didn't realize, and what I was just starting to suspect, was that her beloved boundary map was about to be the least of her worries. I walked up to the house to grab the deed and our property survey, and I noticed something odd, something in the way she kept glancing at the pond. Her expression wasn't just about environmental concern. No, there was calculation behind her eyes. It was the look of someone playing a high-stakes game, unsure if they were about to win or fold. Emma followed me up the porch, slipping her small hand into mine. "Daddy, why's that lady mad at our horses?" she asked softly. "They didn't do anything wrong." Right out of the mouths of children, a simple, honest truth. But I didn't want to cloud her thoughts with adult nonsense about legal loopholes and power plays. When I came back out, paperwork in hand, Victoria was by her sleek silver BMW, speaking rapidly into her phone. I caught snippets of her conversation: environmental breach, a broken bar, immediate enforcement, a broken bar, potential legal action. She ended the call and turned toward me with a look that said she thought the cavalry was on its way. "I've consulted with our legal team," she said confidently. "They've assured me our claims are rock solid. Either you comply voluntarily or we let the courts sort it out." I handed over the survey, which clearly marked the pond as well within our property lines. She barely looked at it before waving it off. "These documents don't supersede environmental regulations," she said, though her voice didn't carry the same certainty it had earlier. That's when it really hit me. This wasn't about horses, or water, or even HOA boundaries. Victoria Blackthorne had her eyes on something else entirely, and getting control of that pond was just the first step. The only question left was, how far was she willing to go? As she drove off in that spotless BMW, leaving deep tread marks in the dirt of my ranch, I had no way of knowing that within 2 days, she'd be standing waist-deep in that very pond with far more than her pride on the line. The same pond now soaked with rain and under scrutiny from law enforcement, facing questions that could turn everything upside down. But Victoria had already set her plan in motion. She counted on me folding under pressure, assuming I'd be just another pushover. What she didn't realize was that Thunderidge Ranch doesn't raise quitters. 3 days after Victoria's bold declaration at the pond, I got a harsh dose of just how ruthless she could be. Emma came home from school in tears, clutching her backpack like it was a shield. I recalled, "Daddy, why are my friends saying we're the bad guys who poisoned the water?" She whispered, her voice trembling. That's when I realized Victoria hadn't just filed some paperwork with the city. She'd launched a full-scale social media assault. Posts on Nextdoor, Facebook, and even the local community bulletin boards were filled with carefully edited videos. Shots of our horses drinking from supposedly contaminated water sources, angled to make our beautiful natural pond look like a toxic wasteland, complete with ominous music and text overlays warning of environmental hazards and irresponsible pet ownership. The comment section had turned into a battlefield. Neighbors I'd known for years suddenly questioned if I was some kind of ecological terrorist. Victoria had played her cards perfectly, casting herself as the concerned citizen standing up against a reckless rancher who didn't care about the community's safety. Her video racked up over 3,000 views and 200 comments, most from people who'd never even seen our property but felt ready to judge based on a manipulated 30-second clip. "This is exactly the kind of irresponsible behavior that drags down property values," wrote someone named Karen_Lovskoy. "HOA rules exist for a reason. People need to follow them," chimed in another. What burned me the most was how Victoria made our horses look like invasive pests destroying pristine wilderness. In reality, they'd been drinking from the same pond their ancestors did for generations. It was a masterclass in twisting the narrative. I had to admire her skill, even as I wanted to throttle her. But Victoria made one critical error in her information war. She got sloppy with details. While scrolling through comments on her viral video, something made my blood run cold. A user named Galaxy_dev_official had liked several of her posts and even shared the video with the caption, "Come community, environmental standards matter for future development." Galaxy Development. The name rang a bell. They were the company quietly buying up ranch land all over the county, promising sustainable luxury communities. A quick Google search confirmed my worst suspicions. Victoria Blackthorne wasn't just a power-hungry HOA president. She was working with developers who wanted my land. The environmental protection angle, just a smokescreen for a much bigger game. That evening, I called my neighbor Tommy Rodriguez, a tech expert who helped me set up security cameras after equipment went missing last year. "Tommy, I need your help with something that might sound crazy," I said, explaining Victoria's campaign and my suspicions about Galaxy Development. Tommy whistled low through his teeth. Heron packed up his men. That's some next-level manipulation. But if you're right about the development angle, We need to document everything before she steps it up. Within 2 hours, Tommy had installed a network of motion-activated, high-definition cameras around the pond. Each was linked to cloud storage, tamper-proof, capturing every move in 4K. "These babies will catch a butterfly landing on a flower petal," he said, grinning. "If Victoria wants to play dirty, we'll have every move recorded." The cameras paid off sooner than expected. The next morning, my phone buzzed with alerts say movement at the pond at 3 a.m. The footage showed Victoria and two men in expensive suits, flashlights in hand, surveying the area. They weren't doing environmental tests. They were measuring distances and snapping photos of sight lines at the exact actions of people planning construction. One man even knelt to scoop pond water into a vial, but instead of disgust, he smiled and nodded approvingly. This wasn't about protecting nature. It was about securing prime real estate with precious water rights, say something invaluable in a drought-prone region. Armed with this evidence, I thought I had Victoria cornered. But she was already 3 steps ahead. That afternoon, Emma and I returned from groceries to find Officer Martinez from the Sheriff's Department waiting in our driveway. "Mr. Madison, I need to speak with you about a complaint regarding unauthorized surveillance and invasion of privacy," he said, his expression neutral. Victoria had somehow found the cameras and filed a report accusing me of illegally recording her activities on public waterways. The complaint claimed I'd installed the cameras without permits, using them to harass and intimidate community officials. The audacity stunned me. She was trespassing on my property at night, but I was the one under investigation for documenting her suspicious behavior. Victoria had also called Channel 7 News, spinning herself as a David fighting Goliath, a concerned citizen being persecuted by a wealthy rancher who thought he was above the law. Jessica Chen, an earnest young reporter, had already shot a segment at the pond, interviewing Victoria about her courageous stand against agricultural pollution. That evening, I sat watching in stunned silence as Victoria, dressed in perfectly coordinated outdoor gear, probably costing more than most people's monthly pay, pointed to our horses and spoke about fighting for future generations. The irony was sharp enough to cute her. Here she was, supposedly defending the environment while secretly plotting to pave it over with luxury condos. Emma sat beside me, confused by seeing our home portrayed as a toxic wasteland on the news. But Victoria's media blitz had an unexpected upside. It caught the attention of people who actually knew their stuff. Dr. Sarah Chen, an environmental scientist from UC Davis, had seen the news segment and reached out directly. Main Pitchel 15 Salsayas I Lake Kapani Test Car I Hune, or frankly, Miss Blackthorn Kdor Scientific Tor Parbil Kulbi Valid Nai Hain, Dr. Caldwell Ni Phone Park Kaha Agar Apche. Main Apktar Lab Independent Test Kana Char Hungji. Yuski Bart Mine Koi Political Ya Biased Tone Nith Surf Sakaitha or Tab Muj Mezuz Hwe Victoric Desperation Ni Mujek Expert Witness Dadiatha. Joask Juth Kapada Fash Kasaktatha. Yes Urfek Narrative Kyung Na Ithabe Ye Facts Kijang Banchukitha or is Bar. Mujye Keentha Humji Eat Sakt Hain. Agal Tuesday Officer Martinez Wappers Aya. Magar is Duffer Yuskale Hupper and Jays Shakbar and Aitha. Is Bar Yuski Ankhun Mine Curiosity Thay Jays Wassel Mine Sak Jana Chatter Ho. Mr. Madison, Uzn Kaha. Mary Porch Kikursi Parbth Huge Abemapas Kpadak Mine Godon Ksathkal Raith Main 22 Salsay Police Mine Hoon Itna Say Mine Yetose Magaya Hoon Kjab Koi Kohani Fitna Ebthti As Main Kukna Kuk Golmal Hota High As Napni Papers Sami Rak Miss Blackthorn Complaints Mine Kukajib Inconsistencies Hain. For example, Wakarai Hain Cap Public Waterways Record Car Raya HOA Lekin County Records Kmutabik, Yetelab to Puritaro Apki Private Property Mine Outer High. For Uzantina Laglag Reports Ka Jink Timestamps Apers Mine Mach Nai Kartitha. Yetelag to High Jays Wasab Kuk Glad Kohani Bano Rai HOA. As she goes along, mainly use coffee offer Kikamas Kamak Officer to Thajo Sakai Mine Interested Tha. Victoria staged narrative saber. Martinez ni serve complaints na edikithiasan por a homework kiatha property surveys, environmental reports, Hattak 1967 historical documents Jabmir dada ni yezamin karidi thinya hundikai, usan porch table par papers fayalet hu kaha, Miss Blackthorn ni Thursday rat 2 beige noise complaint file kithekade shorkareatha lekin apki security footage tadkati haikwa por a rat bar o mindtha illegal dumping ki complaint bikigay lekin county inspections records mutabik. Pitchel 5 salmine koi contamination 9 mila yatu apkade California xabs clean jan warhain. Yafa koi zabar dasti case banai waraha hai. Yes unkamir dil kaboj hall kaho gaya. Behi barkisi authority figure ni Victoriak drama ko peshana that to be emini officer Martinez godiko or yuski taraf bagi. Yuska chera curious that. Darsain Ibaru J's hard affer jab koi adult ho lady kazakar karta that main ni officer ko and alagaya way apni home office mine. Apko yedik na che hai. Main kaha. Main tomic cameras ka footage kolue din parana. Sub a 3 beige ka high definition video mine soft dikrahathe Victoria or do business suits mine log kisi survey J's a calm kareatha measuring tape. Water samples a magar contamination test kakoi concern itha borki wa landscape kit haraf mascara gestures kareatha j's planning chil rai ho environmental testing nilagrai Martinez ni kaha screen karib jukt hue yet development planning j's alagta high main academic cheriko zoom ki enhance kakuski shanak ki yet a Robert Galaxy high a Galaxy development ka CEO is kichera main business section mindik hatha Martinez kenkan mine shaknai ye kin dikrahatha tuskamat labia high usantia se kaha Miss Blackthorn apkil of environment nam par complaints file karai hain, or at Kandhir mine secretly ek development company xath survey karai hain, ye protection nai. Yet a fraud high. Usan footage ki copies mangy. Yes abdik car investigation karuk bil kulbadal gaya high. Abya harassment, trespassing. False reporting a Hattak conspiracy to defraud kake spansakta high. Main yetran tapni sergeant god kata hoon. Jate wakt eman ni uska uniform sleeve keen shliu or masuma yat sapukar, officer Martinez. Kayas kamatlab high angry lady abhamer godon ki hurt nai kasakti. Martinez juk kayuski ankon mind dekta high, muskurata high. Sweetheart. Main yezaraban orngak tamegade safrain, or tamer daddy ko kisi bijutilzam kitchintanaho, lekin Victoria kadrama yahin kartam naihwa, usisham channel 7 news ni ek follow-up segment kaya. Screen par Victoria Cardi the Riverside Heights Community Center Ksami Eoskaras Pazlog protest signs la carcade tha, protect our water, environmental justice families. Baki, elderly residents a substaged protest kahisalagreatha, Victoria ni reporter se kaha, Mr. Madison ni serious environmental concerns kbawa jude hamshaw ignorkia high, humsurf basic safety standards kibat karea hain a johamer fuchiko secure ken, camera ni worry cherad ka log jo Victoria kibravery ko support kareatha magawa jode kaya gaya. Asmain esel truth missing tha pitchel kukdina mine mere actual neighbors ni much milkarapna confusion or support donos wehiakia. Mrs. Henderson a jo sabskaribriti hey neighborly, main 30 sol say why well water pi rai hoon jo is talapse connected high. Kubi koi maslana eaya wo urat meagare a thipetition la car, par beta. Tamegade tuas talab se tab se pani pirea hain jabuska fancy neighborhood barnabinaitha. The box gently from Victoria's trembling hands. This doesn't look like any natural debris. Everyone stood in stunned silence as Dr. Chen carefully rinsed the mud from the surface, revealing a corroded but legible label stamped across the top. Property of Riverside Heights Municipal Services a archival material. Officer Martinez stepped forward, pulling on a pair of gloves before taking possession of the box. This could be a significant piece of evidence, he said, inspecting the worn latch. "We'll need to have this opened and catalogued by the proper authorities, but it looks like it's been down there for a very long time." Victoria, still soaked and now shivering, looked as if she might collapse. Her voice, once so commanding, was barely a whisper. "What a broken bar! What is that doing in your pond?" I shrugged, genuinely as surprised as she was. "Maybe you should have let the experts handle the investigation instead of staging a live performance." Dr. Chen, ever professional, resumed her work while Martinez conferred quietly with one of the technicians. Meanwhile, Emma's live stream had now surged past 10,000 viewers. The internet was ablaze with hashtags like #BondGate, #HODownfall, and #VictoriaTakesADive. That afternoon, Martinez returned with an official search warrant to examine the contents of the box. Inside, they found a collection of old documents, blueprints, and waste disposal records, some dating back to the early 1980s, indicating that the very land Victoria's pristine neighborhood was built on had once been used as an unregulated dumping ground by the municipal services she so vocally championed. The irony was lost on no one. Dr. Chen's final report, published the following week, confirmed not only the purity of our pond water but also revealed minor chemical traces uphill from the Blackthorn development, a residue likely seeping from improperly sealed historical waste pits. The tables had turned, and hard. Victoria's environmental crusade had unraveled into a PR nightmare. The city launched an immediate review of land use records. Channel 7 aired a follow-up story, this time not with Victoria in front of the cameras, but with me, Emma, and Dr. Chen calmly discussing water quality, local ecology, and truth. The battle Victoria had launched with headlines and hearsay had ended with facts, science, and a viral video she'd never live down. Thunderidge Ranch was no longer under fire. Now, it was the beacon of transparency, and ironically, the pond she tried to weaponize had just cleared our name and buried hers. Dr. Chen gently took the box from Victoria's trembling hands. "This looks like a waterproof storage unit," she said, inspecting it. "Judging by the sediment, it's been submerged for quite some time." The box, about the size of a briefcase, was built from heavy-duty aluminium with a rubber-sealed edge, clearly designed to last underwater. Victoria, who had just moments ago been barking orders, now stood silent, her complexion turning from flushed red to ghostly pale. I have no idea what that is," she stammered, but her unsteady voice betrayed something else entirely, a recognition and fear. Meanwhile, Emma's live stream continued to snowball. The viewer count shot past 2,000 as people across the internet shared the video, intrigued by the soggy drama unfolding in real time. Officer Martinez stepped forward with calm authority. "Miss Blackthorn," he said, "you seem to recognize this container. Can you explain how it might have ended up in Mr. Madison's pond?" Victoria opened her mouth, closed it, and repeated the motion several times, resembling a fish flailing out of water, a metaphor not lost on anyone watching her soaked and speechless. The comments section on Emma's stream exploded with jokes, speculation, and conspiracy theories. What none of us realized at that moment was just how explosive the contents of that box would be, and why Victoria had been so desperate to gain control of our land in the first place. Dr. Chen suggested we open the box in a secure location, away from the growing crowd. So we gathered in my kitchen, where the container sat on the table like a time bomb. Water dripped from its weathered surface onto the wood planks my grandfather had laid down decades ago. Victoria slumped in a corner chair, her once polished look now resembling something fished out of a donation bin. Emma's stream had pulled in over 15,000 viewers. Outside, Tommy helped manage a steadily growing crowd of curious locals and online fans who'd somehow tracked down our address. Through the open windows, we could hear car doors slamming and excited voices. The story had broken beyond our fence line. Inside, the tension was thick. Officer Martinez had called for backup, and a detective had been dispatched, sensing this was no longer just an ho squabble. Dr. Chen examined the lock mechanism, a preservation seal rather than a security one. "The corrosion suggests this has been underwater for 15, maybe 20 years, She noted it was built to protect something long-term. Victoria's hands trembled so badly she clasped them together to hide it. When Officer Martinez quietly asked if she needed medical help, she simply shook her head. With a metallic click, the lock finally gave way. The lid creaked open and we all leaned in. The air seemed to pause. Inside were neatly preserved legal documents, sealed in waterproof sleeves and organized with startling precision. Property deeds dating back to the early 1900s. Water rights, mineral extraction permits, and most astonishing of all, geological surveys detailing significant freshwater reserves beneath my land, extending well beyond the pond. Dr. Chen held up one paper with reverent awe. This hydrological study. It shows your property sits above one of the largest aquifers in the entire county. These water rights alone could be worth millions, especially in drought-prone areas. And then came the true shock. At the bottom of the box, wrapped in additional plastic and stamped with official county seals, were the original water use agreements between my grandfather and neighboring landowners. Attached were hand-drawn maps outlining the aquifer's boundaries in exact detail. These weren't just historic records, so they were legal gold. They confirmed that our family held primary rights to the entire underground water system. That meant no major development could legally proceed in the area without our consent. Victoria's face went from pale to ashen gray. These documents, Officer Martinez said slowly, would halt any development project threatening the aquifer. And someone with access to them would have known that before acquiring land or pushing permits. That's when Detective Sarah Walsh arrived, a sharp, focused woman in her 40s who specialized in financial fraud and land disputes. She scanned the documents, then turned to me. Mr. Madison, these water rights make your land untouchable. No developer can touch this area unless they pay you a fortune or find a way to nullify these agreements. Then she looked at Victoria, who was now staring blankly at the floor. Miss Blackthorne, I need to ask you directly, did you know these documents were in that pond? And if so, how? The room held its breath. Outside, Emma's voice rang out in excitement as Tommy explained the significance of what her live stream had uncovered. And then, at long last, Victoria spoke, her voice barely more than a whisper. I found them a broken bar 20 years ago, she confessed. Back when I was working as a real estate attorney for Galaxy Development. Her voice was barely louder than the hum of our old refrigerator. We were researching the Madison property for a potential acquisition. Victoria began, eyes fixed on the floor. I came across those documents in the county clerk's archives. The moment I realized they'd stop our development project cold, I stole them. I dumped them in the pond, thinking no one would ever find them. By the time someone noticed the files were missing, the construction would have been done, and we'd claim the land through adverse possession. Detective Walsh scribbled in her notepad, though her face said she'd heard confessions like this before, and that this one was particularly damning. But then the housing market collapsed in 2008, Victoria continued, tears cutting trails through the dirt on her cheeks. Galaxy Development went bankrupt before we broke ground. I kept quiet, convinced the documents would remain buried. When Galaxy reformed under new ownership last year and started buying up parcels again, a broken bar, I panicked. I was the only one who knew the truth. I figured I could still deliver the land by keeping those water rights hidden forever. The silence that followed was thick, heavy. The scope of her scheme was sinking in. This wasn't just a theft. Victoria had built an entirely new identity, worming her way into the HOA. All to ensure no one unearthed her crime. That's when Emma burst into the kitchen, holding her phone triumphantly. Daddy, people on the internet are saying we're famous. They're calling it the biggest water rights scandal in California history. She paused, sensing the shift in energy in the room. Did the angry lady finally tell the truth about why she was so mean to our horses? Detective Walsh smiled despite herself. Sweetheart, she said, crouching to Emma's level, your little live stream just helped crack a 20-year-old theft and saved your family millions in water rights. Then she stood, snapped on handcuffs, and read Victoria her rights. Her charges included theft of public documents, conspiracy to defraud, and filing false police reports. As the officer led her out the door, I stood stunned, realizing that what had started as Emma's goofy attempt to film a prank had unraveled the county's biggest environmental fraud and secured my family's future. Victoria's arrest hit the local news that evening, but by sunrise, it had gone national. I woke to find 3 news vans idling outside our gate, while my phone buzzed endlessly with calls from reporters, attorneys, and environmental groups. Emma, thrilled by the chaos, ran through the house telling anyone who would listen, "Daddy's Pond is famous on the internet." Her live stream had passed 2 million views, spawning endless memes, most of them featuring a soaked, humiliated HOA president who and somehow turned our humble Thunderidge Ranch into a symbol of fighting back against corporate corruption. But Victoria wasn't about to go quietly. She'd hired an elite legal team known for turning open and shut cases into multi-year battles. The call came Tuesday morning. On the other end was a slick-voiced lawyer named Bradford Steinberg, all Los Angeles polish and $500 an hour arrogance. "Mr. Madison," he began smoothly, "my client was under significant emotional distress when she made those alleged statements. We intend to countersue you for defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and privacy violations related to your illegal surveillance activities." He didn't pause for breath. "Miss Blackthorn's professional reputation has been irreparably damaged by your daughter's reckless live stream. We are seeking damages in excess of $10 million. The audacity of it all was breathtaking. Victoria was now casting herself as the victim framed by a ruthless rancher and a child with a phone. But what Steinberg didn't know yet was that Galaxy Development had already disavowed her in record time. Their new CEO, Patricia Morrison, held a press conference within hours of the arrest. "We are appalled," she announced, "to learn that a former legal consultant engaged in criminal activity involving document theft and fraudulent misrepresentation. Galaxy Development operates with the highest ethical standards. We are cooperating fully with law enforcement and have severed all ties with Miss Blackthorn." The company's stock price actually rose, with investors praising their swift response. Still, the lawsuit stirred up problems I hadn't anticipated. Some neighbors, especially those who'd supported Victoria's original Green campaign, began to whisper. At the grocery store, Mrs. Patterson cornered me by the dairy cooler. "You didn't stage all this for social media, did you?" she hissed. "Was this just a PR stunt to get famous?" Wild conspiracy theories were sprouting like weeds. A few internet commenters insisted Emma's viral video was part of a carefully orchestrated media campaign. Some even claimed we planted the box ourselves. Even Officer Martinez warned me not to underestimate Steinberg. He had a history of confusing juries with slick alternative narratives, ones that sounded just credible enough to cause doubt. Then came the turning point. Judge Patricia Hartwell agreed to hear the case. A respected, no-nonsense figure, Judge Hartwell was known for slicing through legal smokescreens. But more importantly, 5 years earlier, she'd won a case against an HOA that tried to foreclose on her house over garden gnomes. The scandal had exposed systemic corruption in the management company and made her something of a folk hero among homeowners. "I know what happens when people abuse bureaucratic power to serve their personal agendas," she said in the packed courtroom during the first hearing. "This case will be decided on evidence and not by the size of anyone's legal budget." The courtroom erupted in applause. Judge Hartwell didn't smile. "But for the first time since it all began, I did." It didn't take long for the internet to crown Emma as an unlikely celebrity. Within days, late-night talk shows were reaching out for interviews, and influencers across platforms were trying and failing to recreate her accidental viral moment. But beneath all the media buzz, what truly mattered was the way people had connected with our story. It became more than just a quirky property dispute. It turned into a symbol, a fight of ordinary people standing tall against corporate manipulation. A GoFundMe campaign launched by one of Emma's followers raised over $200,000 in just 3 days. Donations poured in from across the country, accompanied by heartfelt comments from people who'd fought their own battles against HOAs, land developers, or bureaucratic overreach. Tommy launched a second campaign, this one to transform our ranch into an environmental education center focused on water conservation. Support came from environmental organizations, political figures, and even a few celebrities. Suddenly, Thunderidge Ranch wasn't just the setting of a scandal, it was a movement. Meanwhile, Victoria's once steely confidence began to crumble under the weight of mounting evidence. Steinberg's legal attacks started to backfire. He tried to argue that the metal box had been planted, but Dr. Chen's forensic analysis showed it had been submerged for decades. His attempt to discredit Emma's live stream, claiming it was staged, collapsed when tech experts testified that the metadata, viewer engagement, and live stream timing were impossible to fake. The most damning blow came from Detective Walsh, who had unearthed emails between Victoria and Galaxy Development, stretching back months before her first visit to our ranch. The woman who had painted herself as an environmental crusader was now fully exposed as the architect of a 2-decade-long scheme built on lies. Still, Victoria wasn't finished. She had one last desperate move, and she was about to play it in the most dramatic way imaginable. The final hearing was set for a Thursday morning in late September. The courtroom was standing room only. Reporters, neighbors, activists, and seemingly half the internet who had followed the saga through Emma's stream had all shown up. Victoria walked in wearing a conservative navy suit, a stark contrast to her usual polished presence. The toll of public scrutiny and months of legal turmoil showed plainly on her face. Steinberg strutted beside her, oozing the confidence of a man who'd monetized other people's disasters, but even he seemed tense as Judge Hartwell entered and scanned the packed courtroom with her signature no-nonsense gaze. Emma sat next to me in the front row, dressed in her Sunday best and clutching a small notebook titled, "The Story of How We Saved Our Horses and Got Famous by Accident." The prosecution laid out its case with methodical precision at 20 years of stolen documents, the manufactured environmental scare, Victoria's collusion with Galaxy Development. Detective Walsh gave detailed testimony on the midnight surveying and Victoria's pondside confession. Dr. Chen confirmed the pond wasn't contaminated, but actually beneficial to the area's ecosystem. Tommy explained the security system's functionality, proving the footage couldn't have been tampered with. Officer Martinez walked through the original inconsistencies that had sparked his suspicions. But the courtroom fell utterly silent when Emma took the stand. Judge Hartwell had hesitated to let an 8-year-old testify, but given how central Emma's live stream was to the case, she had ultimately agreed. And Emma insisted on telling her story. "I just wanted to show my friends how silly the angry lady looked when she fell in the pond," Emma began, her voice small but unwavering. "I didn't know she was lying about our horses. They're good horses. They love the pond, and we love it too. I don't get why grown-ups lie about things that hurt other people. But I'm happy we found those papers. Daddy was telling the truth." The courtroom was still. Reporters dabbed their eyes. Even Steinberg, usually unflappable, was visibly struggling with how to challenge the heartfelt honesty of a child who had accidentally exposed his client's decades-long fraud. Then, something completely unexpected happened. Just as Steinberg stood to begin presenting the defense, ready to argue emotional distress and supposed planted evidence, Victoria rose from her seat and interrupted him. "Stop," she said, barely louder than a whisper, yet somehow it echoed through the courtroom. Steinberg turned sharply, gesturing furiously for her to sit down. But she ignored him and walked steadily, quietly to the witness stand. Her movements had the hollow finality of someone who had run out of lesser and the will to keep defending them. Judge Hartwell called for order as murmurs spread through the gallery, but Victoria no longer cared about optics or damage control. "Your Honor," she said, trembling as she sat down on the witness stand without being called, "I need to tell the truth." Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. "Everything they've said about me a broken bar, it's true. I stole those documents 20 years ago because I was desperate. And I've been lying ever since. I've been lying ever since," Victoria said, her voice cracking under the weight of years of deception. "I told myself I was protecting the community, But the truth I was just trying to cover up my own mistake. I wanted to salvage something from the wreckage of my life. Steinberg jumped to his feet to object, but Judge Hartwell silenced him with a firm wave. She knew what everyone else did. Victoria's confession was about to resolve more than any cross-examination ever could. I lost everything in my divorce, Victoria continued. And then even more when Galaxy Development collapsed the first time. When they restructured, I thought helping them acquire the Madison property might help me recover some of what I'd lost. But it was never about protecting the environment or the neighborhood. It was about money and pride. And I was too ashamed to admit I'd made terrible choices. Her breakdown was both painful and strangely liberating. She cried as she spoke about years of financial stress, loneliness, and the slow erosion of the values she once held dear. I told myself a family ranch didn't matter as much as a development that could create jobs or housing, she sobbed. But when I saw that little girl's live stream, when I saw how joyful and innocent she was, I realized I'd become exactly the kind of person I used to fight against when I practiced environmental law. I became the manipulator, the villain. By then, Steinberg had given up completely. He sat slumped at the defense table, head in hands, likely calculating the damage this meltdown would do to both his reputation and his billable hours. When the dust settled, Judge Hartwell delivered a sentence that was equal parts fair and poetic. Recognizing that Victoria's actions stemmed more from desperation than malice, she sentenced her to 2 years of probation, 500 hours of community service, focused specifically on environmental education, full restitution for legal fees and damages. But the most meaningful piece came last. You will complete your service hours at the Environmental Education Center being established at Thunderidge Ranch, the judge ruled. There, Miss Blackthorne, you will teach children about water protection, environmental truth-telling, and the consequences of deception. Perhaps through your honesty, you'll help prevent others from repeating your mistakes. 6 months later, the ranch had become something none of us could have imagined. The Thunderidge Environmental Education Center now welcomed school groups from all across the state. Kids learned about water conservation, sustainable farming, and the critical need to protect natural resources. Emma had taken on the unofficial role of tour guide, regaling visitors with stories about the day we saved the environment with a phone camera. Her charisma, paired with childlike sincerity, made her a local legend. Victoria now worked side by side with Dr. Chen, helping create lesson plans about water quality and walking students through hands-on experiments. The irony of the woman who once tried to destroy the pond now teaching its virtues wasn't lost on Anania, but her legal knowledge, paired with sincere remorse, made her a surprisingly powerful educator. Her past gave weight to her words. Her fall gave credibility to her advice. The pond itself had become a kind of sacred ground for environmental activists and curious travelers alike. We installed a plaque near the shore, Thunderidge Aquifer Preserve, protected by law, and love it quickly became a favorite backdrop for TikTok videos, Instagram Reels, and activist content. Emma continued creating videos only now. She did it with purpose. She collaborated with conservation groups to raise awareness about water rights, climate change, and environmental integrity. Watching her animatedly explain aquifer science to a group of 7th graders one bright afternoon, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Peace. Victoria's attempt to steal our future harder by some twist of fate had given us something more meaningful than any legal victory. A purpose, a legacy, a bridge from our past to the future. In the end, the best stories aren't always the cleanest. They're the ones where everyone learns something, where justice is met with redemption, where an 8-year-old's live stream can spark a movement. If this story moved you, if it made you think about your own neighborhood, your own water, your own truther, hit subscribe. Drop a comment below and tell us what stood out most, because there are more battles being fought, more underdogs refusing to back down, and more truths waiting to be uncovered. This is Harper Story, so where real-life drama meets the courage to stand up for what matters. And trust me, the next one might just blow your mind. Justice isn't always clean, but it's always worth the fight.